Market News, Sunday, June 29, 2026. This is Market News. Good morning. If you only had time for one thing today, it would be this. Comcast announced the spinoff of NBCUniversal. This is not a small transaction, it is one of the largest corporate restructurings in media history, and it touched every corner of the markets this week. Let's build the picture from the top down. The S&P 500, the Nasdaq, and the Dow all ended higher, with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq posting their best quarter performance since 2020. That is a genuinely strong finish to the quarter. The Dow's close was punctuated by Alphabet's inclusion in the index, a move that StockTwits flagged as a major event. And just before the quarter-end close, Dow Jones futures had lifted on a broader market rally. U.S.-Iran de-escalation had been a tailwind throughout the session, with Alphabet, Rocket Lab, SpaceX, and Tesla calling out as notable beneficiaries of that sentiment before futures eventually slipped after the initial tech bounce. But the real story, the one that produced multiple headlines across dozens of publishers, is Comcast. CNN Business led with the announcement. Comcast says it will spin off NBCUniversal. From there, the coverage quickly branched out. The Street framed it as a transformation of the streaming wars. Bloomberg reported that the spinoff raises questions about the future of several businesses across the cable, satellite, and streaming stack: Disney, Netflix, telecom, and cable companies alike. PitchBook covered how the split could drive deals, though not necessarily for private equity. And then market chatter from MT Newswires suggested that NBCUniversal itself is weighing digital gaming opportunities in the post-split era. That is a genuinely unexpected pivot vector, a legacy media company carving out a gaming division, which would place them in direct competition with the tech platforms that have already been buying game studios for years. So you have the structural corporate move, the downstream competitive question for every media company, and a new open question about whether the standalone NBCUniversal will pivot into gaming. It is a very dense, very significant story. Alphabet, of course, sits at the center of multiple headlines alongside the Comcast narrative. The StockTwits headline for the quarter-end close put Alphabet alongside Verizon, Comcast, Rocket Lab, Supermicro Computer, and Battalion Aerospace as tickers in focus, Alphabet leading the Dow's new chapter. If you are tracking index composition closely, this is a notable shift in which companies the Dow considers representative of the American economy. And then there is the capital. Alphabet is building out an $85 billion AI infrastructure build, a commitment that simply Wall Street framed as potentially game-changing for the company. And that is alongside smaller index inclusion mechanics. The Reuters report mentioned Uber and Waymo ending their robotaxi partnership in Phoenix, a move that touches both Uber, Google, and the broader autonomous driving thesis. The practical implications for autonomous driving timeline expectations are worth sitting with. If the leading rideshare platform and Alphabet's Waymo cannot make it work in a single market, it raises questions about whether the technology, the regulations, or the unit economics are still finding their footing. The AI infrastructure narrative continued to run through almost every thread on the desk. Palantir was up, with Motley Fool asking why its stock is rising today, and the coverage again linking it to Nvidia. Intel outpaced the broader market, with Zacks noting the semiconductors stock outperformed across the Dow, S&P 500, and Nasdaq indexes. Meta's returns exceeded the S&P 500, per Zacks, on a week where its revenue trajectory versus Snap kept generating comparison stories. But there were also headwinds. Microsoft fell amid a market uptick according to Zacks. And the Street ran a story saying Apple's gamble just exposed the AI bubble's fatal flaw, a starkly different take from the usual Apple AI praise. That sits alongside Motley Fool commentary questioning whether the companies that sound the most confident may be the ones investors should worry about, referencing McDonald's and Nvidia. Cathie Wood's activity provided a counter-narrative. As AI stocks declined, Motley Fool reported she went bargain hunting and picked up 3 names. Nvidia appeared in that cluster too, which tells you something about how central NVIDIA remains to every discussion, whether it is about Palantir, Copart stumbling, Delec Holdings popping, ASD Space Mobile's dip after a successful launch, or Cathie Wood's own portfolio moves. NVIDIA shows up in at least 7 headline clusters on its own. On the data storage side, analysts at 24/7 Wall Street flagged 55% upside potential in Seagate and Western Digital despite broader chip sector weakness. The ticker cluster includes SanDisk and the Korean giants Samsung and Samsung Electronics. That is a contrarian call in a sector where confidence has been mixed. Digital asset treasury companies continued their crypto accumulation trend, and Motley Fool asked whether any of them, specifically MicroStrategy and Bitmine Immersion Technologies, are worth buying at current levels, alongside tracking Bitcoin and Ethereum price action. It is the same question recurring every month, but this quarter-end timing, right after the S&P 500 and Nasdaq delivered their best quarterly performance since 2020, gives it extra weight. In healthcare, Genmab reported that its epcoritamab combination boosted progression-free survival in a Phase 3 lymphoma trial, with AbbVie also cited in the cluster. That is a concrete clinical readout, which stands out from the more directional macro commentary dominating the rest of the desk. A few smaller but noteworthy items to round it out. Uber and Waymo ended their robotaxi partnership in Phoenix, Reuters reported, pulling back from autonomous ride-hailing in one of the clearest signals that the self-driving ride business remains harder than the market priced in. Fastly shares were soaring on the day, per stock story. The energy ETF space saw a comparison between VDE and MLP, one cost-focused, one approach-focused, with Motley Fool breaking down how they track the broader S&P 500. And on the M&A and IPO side, Ares Acquisition Corporation Roman III priced an upsized $345 million initial public offering, while Accelerant, after a 50% decline, posted a $459,000 insider sale that Motley Fool flagged as a cautionary case study. Now let's talk about the technical signals. The scan covered 10,675 symbols and generated 11,578 signals. Bullish count, 14. Bearish count, 36. So the bearish signals outnumbered the bullish by roughly 2.5 to 1. The top bullish readings were concentrated in the microcap and warrant space, KTTA, RNWWW, TBLA, WGSWW, and WALK, all showing strong momentum up. The bearish side had BFLX, Dinku, and GDEV was showing overbought territory, and KTTA and NIX were flagging potential overextension. Again, these are largely lower quality, higher volatility names. No widely followed large cap symbols appeared in either the top bullish or top bearish lists. That absence is notable. It tells you that the names actually moving market narratives, Alphabet, NVIDIA, Palantir, Comcast, Meta, are not lighting up the scanner one way or the other. The scan's signal is coming from the fringes. The big names are being driven by fundamentals, corporate action, and geopolitics, not by technical readings. So where do we land? The dominant narrative is a massive corporate restructuring, Comcast splitting NBCUniversal, intersecting with a historic quarter end for the equity indices and the Alphabet Dow debut. NVIDIA and its ecosystem appear in nearly every AI-related thread, even as Cathie Wood picks up the pieces the mainstream is selling. The technical scan is heavily bearish, but almost entirely in names that should not be moving your portfolio. The safe part of the market is holding, the S&P 500 and Nasdaq closing out Q2 2026 with their best quarter since 2020. The speculative part of the market is telling a more complex story, with overbought microcaps, warrant names, and smaller names flashing caution while the broad market finishes strong. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Market News. Stay curious, stay disciplined, and we'll see you then.